All right. Tell me your origin story. Tell me about your childhood and family and the things that have formed you.
Hello, everyone. I know a lot of you might not know me because I worship at the evening service most of the time. But my origin story is I grew up in a small town in the south coast called Bomaderry. Matt from this congregation also came from down that way, and Leonie a bit further south than that. My parents, my dad was in the Navy. That's why I was down that way, because there's a Navy base. My mum grew up in England and then came over when she was about 17. I met my dad through, her father was in the Navy, and they met through mutual Navy kind of things. And then they got married. I was the second of three boys. So I have an older brother and a younger brother that live in Melbourne and Germany.
Okay. Were your family Christian? Was church a part of your growing up?
Yeah, so my dad was Catholic and my mum was an unbeliever. But then in that time, it was like, if one of you was going to church, you both are going to church. So we grew up in that context of going to Mass. And then in early life, around the time I was about 5 or 6, both of my parents moved to a Church of Christ and were baptized, and that's the context that I grew up in church-wise. Why
the church change for them?
My dad felt like there was a disjoint between the way that the church was so hung up on traditions, and he felt it very rigid and often unloving in the sense of the Jesus that he read about in the scriptures. Particularly in the church was often linked to schools and having to pay for schools to be built and this and that, and there was a kind of a constant, like, we're building this almost like an empire of kind of Christendom sort of thing, and he got tired of that sort of thing. His parents were Catholic as well, and they remain Catholic, although with reservations since the revelations around priests and children, etc.
So you grew up going to church for most of your young life in the Church of Christ. Was there a moment when your faith became your own?
So my faith was kind of a bit of a long story in that for as long as I could remember understanding sermons and understanding the faith, I was also listening to a lot of what you would describe as secular punk music and things, which were very anti-authoritarian and anti-church, like kind of pointing out the hypocrisy of like all adult life, it seemed to me, kind of through my early years. And so I became very cynical and not really keen to engage in church really at all. Until the kind of two worlds met in that I went to a music festival where there was a punk band that I was really keen on and that happened to be Christian. But we're also, very anti-war and I was into that sort of thing. So I went along to this music festival, and I kind of had a couple of experiences over a few different years. And the music festival was called Black Stump, by the way. It doesn't exist anymore. But I was had this dual experience of one was around that time I met Leonie, and in her I saw this kind of faith that I just didn't understand at all. Like this kind of, she had this, hope that animated her whole kind of being, it seemed to me, that was, something that I just knew that I lacked, and that I was like, I want what she has, sort of thing. And that kind of bubbled over for a while. It didn't really shift me because it made me feel, even worse off or more unworthy or something. I felt a little bit like, oh, well, she's kind of good and righteous, but I'm not like that sort of thing. I'm going to keep doing my thing. And then a few years later, I was at the same music festival, still in the kind of same malaise of anti-authoritarianism and kind kind of critiquing war and things like that. And a kind of fiery evangelist named Tony Campbell was speaking that year, and his message at the time, and also I should mention that during this time, like through a whole bunch of things, I felt like, you know, there was a God, and that I wanted to know and understand God, but I felt like people kind of got in the way. Like I felt like the church and people and like just meant that I could never get involved in that sort of thing. So, but Tony Campbell, his message was one of vocation, and that, you know, God is calling you, and there's a whole bunch of God's people are involved in, you know, this work, this kind of transformative work to, I guess, renew communities and bring peace and fulfillment and hope, and that the only thing that's kind of holding you back from getting involved in that is yourself. And he kind of told this story of somebody he grew up with who studied medicine because he wanted to help burn victims. And then 5 years later, after he got his degrees and things like that, he saw him again, and he was working as a celebrity plastic surgeon or something, and he kind of rebuked this person, and, you know, it was almost like this person was standing on the stage, and he was like calling him out, like, you were given a commission by God, sort of thing, like you had this hope, this, you know, you were going to be part of this Jesus movement, and you gave it up for money, sort of thing. And I think that like helped me go, okay, there's people that that care about this stuff, and I guess are involved in that transformative work that I guess was the link for my political leanings, and then also my kind of longing for God, I guess. And so, yeah, there was like an altar call and things like that, and from then on I was kind of, card carrying, happy to kind of preach a bit of the love of Jesus and things like that. And that lasted a few years. And then I kind of had a second crisis of faith.
Tell us a little bit about that, where you kind of lost faith and came back. What happened there?
So, I mean, after this kind of word I was given about vocation, and I guess was put on my way in kind of my Christian walk, I studied a Master of Human Rights at university, and started getting involved in issues of international law, and was really interested in Cambodia. I'd kind of been reading about the effects of carpet bombing of Cambodia during the Vietnam War, and the effects that had on the people, and then the genocide, and so I just wanted to kind of be where that was being talked about and where that was happening. And so I was interested in the Khmer Rouge trials, so trying all of the people who were responsible for the genocide. And I got an internship with the public affairs unit of the trial, and that meant writing a lot of transcripts of people who were giving statements, so victims' families, and then also the perpetrators.
Right.
And so I was writing, like, you know, taking summaries of all of the things that people were talking about, and there was this kind of merging in my mind of the perpetrators and the victims, and they talked about it like it was, you know, it had just happened yesterday. It was 40 years ago, but they were talking about it like it had just happened. And I was lucky enough to be around when one of the people who was found guilty of crimes against humanity was giving his kind of statement to the nation, and talking about, like, he was given an opportunity to apologize.
Right.
And that really kind of hit me in the heart in a lot of ways, because he was so, like, just to give context, he ran a torture facility where they would torture fake information out of people and then just have them killed in quite horrific ways. And he, while explaining that everyone in the kind of regime had a gun to their head and a gun to their family, and if you kind of stepped out, you were, you know, dispatched in really horrific ways. Like, while all of that was going on, you know, he explained that he tried to do his best to kind of do small acts of kindness and things kind of within his job, within the system, And, he broke down and he was in tears and he was just like, if I could go back in time, I wouldn't have that view, that I could just do small things like around the edges, that I would have done something to try to stop what happened. And he said that, he was pretty clear about like, I'm not looking for redemption. I don't think people like me can be saved. But I just want you to know that, I'm a human person and, and he apologized over and over to the victims and their families. It was broadcast all over Cambodia. And I kind of had this kind of, and I was watching this and I felt like I was the only Christian in the room watching this kind of really intense moment of, I guess, confession, yeah. And this man looking for redemption, and maybe not finding it, but felt like I didn't have anyone to debrief that with or to see a Christian lens, because nobody was really. It's not a Christian nation at all, and so there wasn't really any Christians around, and so I just felt really alone and really kind of, what does this all mean, and how can people do these things to other people, but then also retain this kind of thread of humanity? How does a God kind of let this sort of thing happen? How do Christians kind of continually look the other way when, there's genocide in Cambodia or massacres in Sri Lanka? I remember around the time where the Australian government voted against the independent investigation into the 2009 massacres in Sri Lanka, and just feeling like humans voted for this, like they don't want to find out about, and just being completely, that destroyed, I think, faith for me. Again, in the sense of humans were the thing that were blocking, rather than, I felt like there was a God kind of constantly, but I was like, the church and Christians and have just kind of made me feel alienated from, I guess, a sense of Christian community. So I came back from Cambodia, and it actually wasn't until I came to this church that I kind of refound. And again, it was the kind of a situation where not expecting to kind of find people who could encourage me and give me courage, I guess, in faith and things again. But I needed somewhere to stay while I was doing another degree at Sydney Uni. So Sierra, who I knew from my previous degree, mentioned Epworth House next door. So I moved in there, and I kind of went, this is probably a good place if I'm going to restore faith, sort of thing. And a really great moment that I remember is that, I was really depressed around that time for a few reasons. But I remember walking from Epworth just down the street. I didn't really know what I was doing or where I was going, but John Hurt was at the front steps, and he was just kind of saying goodbye to somebody else, and they'd walked off. And he kind of saw me in the corner of his eye, and he just went, "Marcus," as I was, and I, said, "Hey John, what's going on?" And he goes like, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" And I said, "I don't know, going for a walk." And he goes, "Get in here," and kind of pulled me in, marched me in, and sat me over in that corner there. Sat me down and was just like, "You look like you need somebody to talk to. What's going on?" I can tell, he could see kind of what was going on, and didn't really say much, but allowed me to talk out the struggles that I'd been having, kind of all of the Cambodia stuff, and it was a good couple of hours maybe. And then I think Carol came in and was just like, "Have you been just, we've got work to do." And so that kind of, it was a nice way to wrap things up. But then, it was just like that kind of thing, I guess, restores faith for me. It was, gives me a sense of hope and gives me I think there's some part of me that really needs that, to be part of a community that shares life and shares stories and helps give each other courage. And so, I've kind of been here in this church community ever since.
So based on your coming to faith and kind of losing faith and coming back to faith again, what are some of the big faith lessons that you've learned?
I think probably having good expectations for, I guess, change. Okay. I think yesterday was a bit of a another one of these moments, but like having correct expectations around the potential for human beings themselves or the political process or whatever structure society kind of sets for itself maybe won't bring about the kind of, I guess, renewal and reconciliation I think that we that we yearn for as Christians. And that trying to remember that God has promised that and has kind of lived through that suffering, and that I guess like through that suffering and that resurrection and that conquering of death, that we don't have to worry about death, and we don't have to worry about I guess our own death and our own ending, but we are called to get involved, and I guess just remembering that is a lesson for me. Like I think forgetting is a huge part of my walk, and the importance of remembering, I think, is something I've learned. Yeah. And so church for me is that kind of weekly reminder that we can hope, and that there is a kind of a truth that we can hold on to.
Okay. Tell us a bit about the work you do.
So I work for Uniting World, which is the international aid and partnerships arm of the Uniting Church. Basically means we engage in partnership with churches overseas who we have a history with through our denominational links, in churches and Methodist churches, Congregationalist churches, and then other united churches and similar churches to us. And then we try to have relationship with them in meaningful ways, both through kind of shared ministry, shared resources, but then also projects that are beneficial to a given community. And we try to see that as transactional. So, in Australia we have a lot of wealth and a lot of potential to help out in poorer communities. So that's a big part of what we do. But then also in the other direction, we help facilitate ministers to come and work from overseas communities to work in Australia, to study here. To give an example of that, we have a strong kind of relationship with the China Christian Council, which administers the state-run church in China. And we don't have a lot of, they've got this huge, power base and, a lot of access to a lot of resources and things. But what they don't have is so much theological consistency and grounding and things like that. So we help connect them up with theologians and things in Australia to be able to work through a whole bunch of their issues on what they think about a given thing, which in the context of China, I guess can be really massive.
Totally, yeah.
In terms of the amount of people, the amount of Christians, it's the fastest growing kind of Christian church in the world. So things like that really excite me when it's like, even if we're just tinkering at the edges of a given theology or something, it can have huge ramifications across, literally millions of people.
Any idea what drives your passion for international work, international development, peace stuff?
Yeah, so I've always kind of, maybe not always, but something has kind of struck me in that the Christian worldview, I guess, that has been imparted to me is that all life is kind of connected together, is interconnected in a way that makes it so, if I have something and somebody doesn't have something, I think that there needs to be in the same way that if a family member, didn't have something and I had something to give, that I would want to fulfill that need. And I think the Christian message in the kind of Christian community is that, one of the functions, I guess, of Christian community is to fulfill that need, that inequality, that like not having, or that if there's some part of it that's broken down or is oppressed or is, and internationally, I think that's where all of the extreme poverty, the dictators and the the human rights violations, and so my faith pulls me into that, and it makes me want to, I guess, be a part of. I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe, like, because what can you do?
Sure.
As an individual, but like a lot of the time, not much. So that's why I kind of chose this area of work where I get to be with a group of people, with a community of faith, with a church denomination, and be able to achieve things bigger than myself. And that gives me a lot of encouragement, a lot of, like in a lot of ways, I think I need that. If I wasn't kind of in that space, I probably would go a little bit crazy. I'd be trying to do things on my own, or I'd try to, I'd get disillusioned, I'd get cynical, and I'd be back to where I was, I think. I guess before I came to faith and I guess was struck by the gospel message.
Okay. So you chose the two Bible passages for today, one from Matthew and one from Philippians. What made you choose those as your passages?
A couple of reasons for both. The Philippians one is again to do with remembering, and because so much I think of my problem, or that I find hard to do, is to remember those truths, to remember what God has given, like what a beautiful thing life is, and that what a gift. And in the Philippians verse, he talks about, there's a kind of an ambiguity in that he says, I want to forget the past and strive on towards, the goal or the one thing. It's like I haven't got there yet. But at the same time, he says, like, hold on to the thing that you have, like to the thing that you've been given, like hold on to it. And for me, that means like remember that thing. So it's a lot of like forgetting the stuff that isn't important, the stuff that, the general life, and like remember that thing that God gave you. Back when you're, I guess your faith was this like fiery, surer thing. And so I get a lot of encouragement from verses like that where they it's ambiguous but points to something truthful.
Sure.
And the second verse, again, there's two reasons. One of them I like that it says, and some of them doubted.
Yeah, okay.
So there's, thinking about the entire gospel and all that's happened, and that there's been this crucifixion and resurrection event, and that it's like some worshipped and some doubted. And that comes back to, I guess, the expectations I have around my own faith and the faith of others and things, that often there's going to be doubt. And that often, there's going to be struggle of, a struggle of faith, and to be able to confidently say, this is the thing, Jesus is the thing that animates my life. Sometimes you're going to be one of the people that is like some of them doubted. And I get a bit of encouragement from that because, I didn't see a crucifixion or a resurrection.
Sure.
And even the people that did. But anyway, the other thing that I like about that verse is the kind of the message of I've forgotten the two parts that I like about it, but one of them is definitely that. That I like the bit that's all authority on heaven and earth has been given. I often think about that verse when I wonder, why isn't God acting in the world in the way that God did in the Old Testament, and that kind of like, obvious, real intervention. And to me, that problem gets solved by, that all authority has been given to me. And the way of Jesus was so, in a lot of ways, different to, I guess, the way of God in that Old Testament sense. And it is very much giving people life and enabling them to serve one another, and seeing that as something important to life itself. The kind of, life in community and serving the marginalized and helping one another, learning to love better, like admitting that we don't always have loving, and we're often greedy and selfish, and but the way of Jesus is not kind of this forceful intervention, but it's a loving relationship. And then at the end, the idea that God is always with us to the very end. I get a lot of encouragement out of that. So it's one of those verses that I always think about, and for me, it's very easy to remember because I've heard it so many times.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah,
That's great. Tell us about you and Leonie. You guys met at school?
Yeah, so Leonie was the new girl in year 9, I think it was. And we sat next to each other in science class.
It's romantic.
Yeah. And then, over a few years and things, we became friends and developed, and I had a crush and things. But there was always this kind of like an idea in the back of my head as well that like, one day I'll marry that girl, sort of.
Right. Yeah.
It didn't work out for a very, very long time. But yeah, it was definitely a journey.
Yeah. And you've been married for how long now?
Like 8 months or something.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
But we've known each other ever since.
Yeah.
Off and on.
You've got something exciting happening in a couple of months. How are you feeling about impending parenthood?
Feeling nervous but excited.
Okay.
Just really excited to meet her. And then nervous, I guess, because of the responsibility and things. It's like now there's going to be an extra consideration in all things. An extra kind of element, and it's a beautiful but sobering thought.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. Couple of final things. What's your vision for Like Heart Uniting Church going into the future?
This might sound like a cop-out, but I think just keep doing its thing.
Okay.
Like, I really love this community, and I love what we do and who we are, and how we love. And I just think we need to keep doing that and keep holding each other and holding this thing together.
Okay.
I'm excited.
And this is the question that always gets asked in the Tapestry of Faith. If you could meet God face to face, what question would you ask?
Yeah, this was the hardest one that I was thinking about. It was really difficult. But I think I'd probably ask about inequality in a kind of a creation sense, in the way that it's not everybody is created with the same kind of starting line by any means, in terms of disability or place of birth or political circumstance that you're born into and things like that. And it's one of those things that I can solve, I think, logically, but at the same time I would want to be like, but come on, like, what's the deal with that and why? I'd love to hear some thoughts about that from God.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions before we wrap up? Okay. Thank you for your story. Are you okay if I pray for you?
Yeah.
Let's pray. God of us all, we thank you for the stories that bind us together, and we thank you for the threads that we hold in common and the threads that make us unique. We thank you for the privilege it has been to hear Marcus's story. We thank you for the seeds of faith that were planted in his early life through his parents and churches. We thank you that he refound his faith following a really difficult period of life where it was difficult to reconcile your goodness with the ways of the world. We thank you for his relationship with Leonie and for the new chapter that awaits them in parenthood. And we thank you for the work that Marcus does in international development. We pray for Marcus's ongoing journey of discipleship and learning, that he will stay true to remembering the core things, that he will be invigorated for the commission that God has placed on his life. And may we all be heartened to do those things too, to remember the core of our faith and to be invigorated to take up the commission that God has put on us. In your name we pray. Amen.